We come to the end of that IEC briefing, probably the shortest it has been over the past couple of days, Francis.
Which hopefully means the number of issues has whittled down, because there was certainly a lot of them yesterday. But the IEC, just ironing out a few of those issues. And we're going to continue to discuss what we're also seeing on the leaderboard in terms of results.
Commissioner Msutu Mwebia upset, to use his word, that people are making all sorts of allegations without giving them a proof, because if you've had experience, that is not in line with what the IEC is supposed to provide you with, then do please come forward. Then processes can be followed, and your complaint or allegation can actually be dealt with. It reminds me, in fact, of what they also had to say earlier in the day during that 11 o'clock briefing, where, again, they were not taking kindly to politicians from, who were making all sorts of allegations, casting aspersions, on the work of the IEC in ways, both the IEC and some political parties, it must be pointed out, were actually saying doesn't bode well for the integrity, of this process. If you have allegations, please bring them forward. If you have accusations, please have a basis, on which you level them. We are joined now here in our makeshift studio by Gogo Machikwi. Welcome. And thank you very much for coming through. We're also joined remotely by Asanda Mwasheng, who joins us from the elections center in the Western Cape. Asanda, welcome to you too. I'm going to start with Aubrey here. Just your takeaways from everything that the IEC has had to say, the challenges they were confronted with, the accusations that political parties and other people have leveled off them, which obviously speak to the integrity of this election.
Well, Vuyo, I still maintain that the IEC is one of the best election agencies in the world. Now, globally, when you assess the integrity of an election, there are certain things you look at. First of all, you look at the integrity of the voters' roll. You look at the quality of staff available to the electoral agency. You look at the integrity of logistical arrangements, and you look at the extent to which an electoral agency adhered to or deviated from legal prescripts. And lastly, you look at whether the overall electoral experience was free and fair. And this is how we should assess the IEC and its performance with regard to this election.
So let's see if Asanda agrees. I mean, the disenfranchisement, or it was quantified yesterday at 6,000, and those people, the IEC, were being contacted. They were the ones who tried to vote. They were registered, they were eligible, but they could not vote. The IEC said it had tracked everyone down 6,000. Does that warrant sort of the accusations that we've seen and the how do I put it, the accusations about the technology, about the machines, the demonization of the new technology being used?
I think that the elections for the IEC in terms of performance, I think we've seen some really brilliant work from the IEC in past elections. We've seen very few hitches, and they were usually able to solve them quite quickly. But this time, there really were delays in terms of coming up with solutions, delays in terms of solving issues on the day, so that people who were turned away and could not vote were able to vote. But this time, their technology systems let them down from quite early on. I mean, I remember when we laughed at the ANC when they claimed that, it wasn't their fault, that it was the IEC systems. And I'm beginning to believe that on some level that may have been true, because voters also then started to experience problems when trying to change the wards where they were going to vote and trying to change addresses and those kind of things, which were eventually not captured. And we've heard a lot of people talk about, not being able to vote because they were told they were at the wrong station, or they were told they don't exist on the roll at all. And these are people who have voted previously. So I think we're going to see a significant number of people who are disgruntled because they did go out and try and vote. And now that we're sitting with such a low turnout, you just wonder what difference those numbers, no matter how small, could have made in terms of the outcome.
Gogo Machipri, the other thing that the IEC is being held responsible for is the turnout in this election, which is, to put it mildly, rather interesting. For me, because often the accusation is coming from the politicians themselves, who are refusing to take liability, to accept responsibility for their own contribution in the turnout that we've seen.
Well, there were defects, there were deficiencies in IEC processes during this election yesterday. But I think the impact was negligible. But as an individual voter who went to vote yesterday and they could not find your name, the impact is calamitous at an individual level. But overall,
in the same way that Change Party, for example,
yes,
there were
exactly.
problems with their ballots,
Yes.
but then they chose to, as the prayer president put it, put the country first, because it would be a nightmare to insist on a rerun of yesterday's election. So, but although they said it did hurt them as a political party, that they couldn't be.
The Change Party did put something first. I don't know what that is. I am not sure it is the country. Because we sat here with the IEC saying we are issuing a joint statement. Now the statement does not even tell us what they agreed upon, which first of all betrays a lack of transparency. And that is why I say that Change put something first. I'm not sure it's the country.
But your thoughts, though, on the pronouncements by certain leaders, or officials of political parties actually holding the IEC responsible for the turnout?
Well, that makes sense if the IEC is responsible for the woeful and dismal performance of the state, particularly at a local level. Otherwise, we're dealing here with saber-rattling of a nature that is very unhelpful and is misleading. The reason we had such a low voter turnout is because the preponderance of those who did not want to vote have lost confidence not only in electoral processes as an instrument through which they can effect change in their lived reality, but have lost confidence in the political class in its entirety. In other words, to the extent that the preponderance of those who did not go and vote yesterday would have voted for the ANC in an ideal world for the ANC, we can argue that because they did not see an alternative in any of the other parties, what they were doing is to cast a vote of no confidence in the political class as a whole. But I think the overall problem is that they are saying that through elections they have not seen change in the past, and therefore they are disengaging from electoral processes, but they're also expressing a lack of confidence in the capacity of the democratic process as a whole to deliver change in their lived reality. The political parties can blame the IEC all they like, but what they are saying does not wash.
Asanda, I'm keen to hear your thoughts on this very same question.
I think that, there is some blame that the IEC needs to take because they have failed, I believe, in terms of voter education, in terms of citizenship or active citizenship action, because a lot of people don't quite understand how the system works, particularly for local government. I mean, I was just even earlier clarifying certain points around, for example, the fact that the PR system is only for parties, so independent candidates can only be voted for at ward, but when it comes to the PR system, you're looking at political parties. And so these are the nuances that should have been clear to every single voter before they went to the polls. And we spent a lot of time being told about, the power of independent candidates and what is and, how it's going to change things. But there wasn't enough education on how does this impact the system and what does it mean, because our system is still very much political party based. And so I think that clarification around things like the PR system and how it works vis-a-vis the independent candidates, I think that, we should have had big campaigns around why it's important to vote, even if you're upset at the party that you would originally vote for. People need to understand that not voting means essentially voting because if the majority party continues to win, whether that's the ANC, if you're national, or it's the DA, it means that you're kind of voting without voting for the party. And so your protest of not going to the polls actually ends up being useless, unfortunately. And I think that this is something that the IEC really needs to look at and really needs to think about. But also, I think political parties also need to kind of look at themselves and say, where have we failed? And why have we failed South Africans so much that this is the lowest voter turnout that we've ever seen? And often people actually do go out and vote in local government elections because it is about, what happens to you when you open the tap. Is the water coming out? When you press the button, is the electricity? And what happens when you walk outside? Is it a tarred road? Does it have potholes? If you're driving, are you now having to change your tires every single week because the potholes are so big, people are even swimming in them, as we've seen. And I think that, our political parties are not honest with themselves, and the fact that they failed a lot of people. I'm not just talking about the ANC or the DA as the governing party, I'm talking in general, because they had the entire COVID to engage voters about what it is that they were doing, particularly as opposition parties, to challenge the ANC, to challenge the DA as dominant parties in the different provinces. And they didn't do this. They didn't activate for how they see COVID recovery happening. They simply took this, I think, I would even argue, as a holiday. And we saw more civil society action than actual political party action. And I think that this is a monumental mess up of corruption of the ANC, which should have delivered the vote to all opposition parties, but they were not there. They were nowhere to be found, and voters could not hear them, could not see them. And they need to look deep within them and ask themselves some very tough questions. And really, all of us as South Africans need to ask ourselves, where is this democracy going, and why is it failing so dismally for the majority? Because while us as the middle class are able to access this vision, this dream of South Africa in a lot of ways, the majority of South Africans don't have electricity, don't have sanitation, don't have paved roads, and are simply facing zero service delivery, whichever way you look at it.
So Aubrey, I remember Jesse Duarte from the ANC coming in as voting was progressing. I think we had 2 hours to go, appealing to voters to get out there. And there does seem to be a missing link that ANC voters, certainly in the urban areas, if they didn't like their party of choice, they sat back, not understanding that means basically a vote for the opposition. That was the old idea in rural areas, that if there's low turnout, it'll help the ANC. But was that switch made for the cities? Did the ANC make that switch for the voters, that they had to get out there in urban areas? Otherwise, it was going to be dire for the governing party.
Well, if you look at voter turnouts since 1994, the voter turnout for a national and provincial election tends to be higher than the voter turnout for local government elections. And if you unpack the lower voter turnout in local government elections, it is the supporters of the ANC. You can put it another way. It is black voters who tend not to turn up on voting day. And it is the white voters who tend to turn up in higher proportions for local government elections. But this time, with what I think is a watershed election that we had yesterday, I think to look at the voter turnout misses the point. What we should be looking at is the participation rate. Remember, when you're looking at the voter turnout, you are looking at the number of registered voters who did turn up on voting day and then voted. But if you are looking at the participation rate, we are looking at the total number of eligible voters, and therefore look at the proportion of those voters who did turn up on voting day. And what we will see when you compare the figure for the voter turnout and the participation rate is much lower. Therefore, it is the participation rate which is telling you the real story about the state of our electoral democracy and about the state of our democracy in general. With such a low participation rate, citizens, as I keep on saying, seem to be saying they've lost confidence in the capacity of electoral politics to change their lived reality for the better. But we may also be moving towards another point, if we're not there yet, that they are losing confidence in the capacity of a democratic project to deliver on the promise of a better life for all. So what we need to decide is what do we want to do. And to use an analogy, think of a child who has a coloring book, and you give this child 1,000,000 crayons, for example, so the child can color in whatever color they want. The one thing the child is not going to do is to change the outlines of the picture. The outlines of the picture here is the political system, particularly the fact that it is a liberal democratic system. That's the outline of the picture. In my view, unless you are able to use the different colors within the picture and change the outlines of the picture, you are not going to significantly change the lives of our people. So you need to do the two things that are critical in my view. Firstly, look at the system as a whole. Does this system have the capacity to deliver on the promise of a better life for all South Africans? My answer is no. Should we wait until it can before we start tinkering with whatever we can change within the system? The answer is no.
Sure. All right, let's just look at where we are right now, and we're going to give you a sneak peek with the CSIR. We were talking about their incredible projections earlier, how they can accurately start making calls around the big metros and, of course, around the overall vote. We do have Professor Pravesh Deba, and Professor, the information behind you is out of date, so we're going to bring up the new figures, but the IEC has just said that 55% of the vote is counted, and obviously with that you have quite a lot to look forward to the end. Before we start delving a little bit later into the cities, can you give us an idea of what we're looking at nationally in terms of not where we are right now, but how you see the finishing line of this election?
Okay. So what we've done is around about 5 o'clock this morning, we gave an initial prediction as to what the final outcome would be for each of the top political parties. What I've done now is I've looked, to see, how well we've predicted at that stage. at a national level. And in fact, I've always been saying that the model, as long as the model is able to predict within a 2% error, it means that the model has done well. And looking at where we are at this moment, the model is, according to what we had predicted at 5 o'clock this morning, is within around 1% error.
Okay, so you're very confident right now. What does that mean for the ANC if we hold you to it at the finishing line?
The ANC, it was looking at. I would need to
definitely below 50, yeah. And we understand, Prof. We're going to bring up those predictions for you that you have modelled. But the ANC definitely below 50.
It was around 46 or 47%.
Yeah.
That's what we are looking at.
Which would be significant. Thank you, Professor. We'll come back to you, but let's see who Sophie, our international editor, is chatting to on the floor. Sophie.
Still here, and I have two guests. I have the PAC and also the ACDP. PAC, it is the national chairperson, Busiso Qabas. Busiso, you were in Castel, very eloquent, talking about your manifesto and what ACDP is going to do. Sorry, Bongani Lutul. But that didn't translate into votes.
Thank you, Sister Sophie. Look, we are halfway there now in this marathon. I think we already have 3 seats in the Western Cape. You should start seeing, us picking up now in the last level of the race. We know how these things work. I think our constituency now will start trickling in the wards that we feel strongly about, as well as the voting districts. So I think we're still quite optimistic. It's not over until the Fed lady says it's over, don't they say?
It looks like you veered off the road when you were supposed to talk about what you were going to do. You decided to focus on a very thorny issue of COVID-19 and vaccine. And of course, you know that it's a divisive issue. Don't you think that's where you got it wrong?
I disagree with respect, Sister Sophie. Look, it was pertinent that we deal with the issues of vaccination. We were in the middle of a pandemic. Political parties had to deal with interventions on the manifesto, reflect what they were saying to the people. You understand that we're a Christian-based party. We focus on values. It was a fundamental issue, the value issue. We're not repenting on those things. It's common cause that, there's corruption, there's lack of service delivery. We all know that. But over and above that, these elections fell squarely on the interventions around the pandemic itself. And so you'll see that people took our message seriously, were eloquent on it, and you'll see it translating through the votes. We're still hopeful.
2024 around the corner, and are you hopeful that you'll do better?
Absolutely. If we don't do as expected, this elections will lick our wounds, we'll go back to the drawing board, see what's in store for us, and come back bigger and stronger. The ACDP has been around since 1994, will continue to play a pivotal role in the democracy of this country. We still have a lot more to offer.
Thank you so much. That was Bongani Luthuli, ACDP NEC member. Now I want to speak to the PAC. The PAC with a very, very rich history. The party that has fought for the land, but really struggling.
We are struggling, you are correct. We are not getting the numbers that we expected and that we want. However, we are still confident that we will maintain our current position and will even go a little bit higher than what we performed last time. We see areas like the coast, particularly around the Eastern Cape. We are seeing some promising numbers coming out of there. So as the first numbers around Gauteng, you'll see that most cities, very few numbers have come in, and mostly suburban, and our target areas are still to come.
Shouldn't the leadership take a blame? Because you didn't perform that well in 2016 and previous elections, and people were hoping that because you are still there, you will rebuild and become a force to be reckoned with in terms of your history.
The party has renewed itself. If you look at our age in terms of the NEC, Our deputy president is in his 30s, so we have renewed ourselves. Even if you look at our candidates across the country, we're quite youthful and energetic, and we're setting a new pace. This for us was a construction stage, and we feel that we have done sufficiently for that construction building up to 2024 and the next local government election.
Looking forward to 2024, are you ready? Are you working hard to rebuild the party? Those challenges of, fighting for positions in and out of court, can you, with conviction, say that you are done with those kind of politics? Because unless you do away with that, there's no way you'll grow.
Conflicts are a part of the human condition. There will always be disagreements. We cannot promise that there will not be disagreements, but what we promise society that we will manage our differences much better than what we did. I think it should be clear in public that we're one of the better organizations to handle conflicts. If you see the number of funerals that have been there due to conflicts in other parties, we have not seen that. We've used the instruments that the country provides us, which is the courts. We feel that those are right instruments. However, it's preferable that it does not need outsiders who are able to handle our problems ourselves.
Thank you so much. That was the PAC's Busiso Xaba. He is the national chairperson of the PAC Vuyo. You know very well that this is an organization. It is very old. And this is Robert Sobukwe's party. And I think, there's this song, Vuyo, Ubani Bani Angalila Umakasibona Sinje. I'm just asking myself whether Robert Sobukwe Angege Alile na Umakaboni PAC Isogola Gangaka. Over to you, Vuyo.
Thanks, Sophie Mkwena, of course, on the floor here at the National Results Center, speaking to various political parties. I know we're going to talk numbers, right? The latest numbers, but I can't resist this, Gogo Obri, how election after election has actually hemorrhaged most of the components of the broad mass liberation movement. When you think about parties like your PAC and your ZAPO and so on.
Well, during the struggle, when we talked about the liberation movement, we were not talking about a single organization. So when we talked about the liberation movement, we're talking, for instance, about the ANC, the Black Consciousness Movement, the Pan-Africanist movement,
your Unity movement.
And so on. But I think what has happened here, to the extent that we became reductionist and spoke of the ANC as the liberation movement, this single entity, instead of this collective of organizations that were part of the liberation effort. This single entity has caused collateral damage to some extent to the liberation movement as a whole. On top of the internal problems organizations such as the PAC and the Black Consciousness Movement on their own were experiencing. But if you come back to the ANC and you stick to the reductionism of the ANC as a single entity that is a liberation movement, the ANC talks about the people as the key motive force of the revolution. What seems to have happened is that this key motive force of the revolution, the people, have decoupled their interests from the interests of the ANC. And that is manifesting as them not only withdrawing from the ANC, but from the electoral process as a whole.
All right, let's ask Asanda to weigh in here, and we are going to start looking at those projections for the big hung cities.
Yes.
But Asanda, maybe just your comment on the big picture that we know, which is that the ANC has lost ground and has gained less than 50% of the vote. A dominant party in the history of South Africa. Yeah, sure. Is that in itself historic?
Yeah, I mean, I think obviously it's very historic, but it's also to be expected because this is what happens to liberation movements after a number of years and a number of elections. They tend to lose popularity and they tend to kind of disappear into the sunset in a lot of ways because you can't trade on your role in liberating people forever. Eventually, you have to deal with the people that are in front of you, that are liberated, that are in a democracy, and that are looking to you to deliver services and are looking to you to change their lives based on the promises that you made when you were liberating them. And the ANC really has saddened a lot of people because it promised a lot and it delivered quite a lot in the early stages, but then kind of lost momentum somehow with comrades focusing more on personal enrichment, focusing on building these patronage lines that then excluded, various people and really just kind of lost their way ideologically and also from a values perspective. And unfortunately, they took the voters with them and hammered and emotionally abused, as far as I'm concerned, a lot of voters who put a lot of hope, a lot of heart into the ANC as their former liberators. And I think that they really are going to struggle and trudge along until they come to their death because you have, young people who were not born during apartheid who are now voters. You have people who experience half of apartheid and half of freedom and are saying, we lived through apartheid and it was horrible, but you are now also taking us through a very horrible phase, even though it's not comparable to apartheid. And I think that one of the biggest things that the ANC failed on is to figure out how to deal with the inequality that apartheid caused, which was based on racial lines and continues to be based on racial lines. They failed to deliver equality. They failed to bring the majority of South Africans, the majority of black South Africans who continue to be poor with them. And this was done through various things because the ANC has amazing policies. One of the best policies, in my opinion, sit with the ANC, but they do not implement them. They have affirmative action, economic empowerment, which was meant to deliver, some equality and destroy inequality, but then they didn't monitor it. They didn't think through their implementation properly. They went and self-enriched. The Cyril Ramaphosa's of this world are rich because of black economic empowerment and him and, his whole group of cadres. And what they were supposed to do was to plow back. What they were supposed to do was to make the base, like broad base PE. They were supposed to make the base broader, but instead they kept tightening it such that the only people who could be rich in South Africa were either former political party members of the ANC or people aligned to them. And that is the opposite of what was supposed to happen. And the ANC is now paying the price. They're also paying the price for things like implementing minimum wage. Beautiful. But then if you don't implement monitoring mechanisms behind that minimum wage, then the people will never realize it. And companies will continue to act with impunity. And so you have situations where we run forward and go by leaps and bounds from a policy perspective, but when it comes to implementation, when it comes to, monitoring, the ANC fails us. And because of this, it really kind of does this thing where it puts the hopes of people so high because the policies are so good, and then it dashes them so devastatingly because the implementation is not right, and the hearts of the people that they choose are not in the right place, and the caliber of the people that they choose are not the right people. And it's not just about qualifications from a formal education perspective, but it's also like not choosing people with the right kind of experience, not choosing people with the right kind of understanding of the complexity of the South African economy and how it is actually rigged to continue inequality and to replicate, the impossibility of delivering a true better life for black South Africans. And that is why they're failing. And they're going to die out if they don't, I don't know, by some miracle, pull some rabbit out of a hat and start dealing with this issue and start tackling it in a very earnest way. And the political parties that are cropping up now have started promising these things that the ANC used to promise. And the ANC now sounds like, that old that old person in the family that tells lies and never really delivers on their promises.
All right, thank you very much, Sanda. And let's start crunching those numbers as we promised. And I'm here with the CSIR explaining earlier that what we had was 55% of the vote called earlier. The IEC says that has been counted. But the CSIR already making projections in the early hours of the morning. Professor, you were saying, and you're quite happy with your confidence levels. So we now can start looking at the overall vote. The ANC below 50%, and the DA there, projections, if we just go a meal to the national vote, projecting 22%, which would also be quite a significant loss for the DA. If you can see that screen, are you happy? Just give us the overall picture.
What we're predicting at this moment, when just over 50% of the voting districts have been declared, is that ANC will end up with 46.4% of the, and DA would end up with 22%. And you can see the last elections in 2016, ANC was 54.5, so they've dropped from 54.5 to now 46.4. And you can also see that the DA was 27%, and they've dropped from 27% to 22%. The EFF has gained grounds from 8.2% in 2016 to now what we are predicting they will end up with around 10.6%. Obviously, the Action SA is the one that, a lot of people are concentrating on at the moment, and we are projecting that they would end up around 2.1%. I must say for Action SA, we could expect it to be slightly higher than the 2.1%.
Yeah, and Herbert Mashaba was very optimistic about Joburg, saying their predictions are higher than yours. We'll look at Joburg. Let's bring up Joburg, in fact. But Action SA getting over 2% of the national vote. And remember, the national vote doesn't count. We're voting in municipalities, but it gives you an idea of the overall popularity of each party. 2% for a new party that's only rarely contesting in two provinces isn't bad.
It's not bad at all. And as you can see for Johannesburg, which is now on the screen, for Action SA, we are projecting that they would end up with, around 13.2%. So, that would be quite high for Johannesburg. With ANC dropping...
In fact, it would be higher than the EFF. So Action SA, according to your projections, comes in third in Johannesburg, displacing the EFF.
Correct. But we must also realize at this stage we are 35.8% of the VD declared. So the ANC again, you can see it has dropped from 44.9% to 34.4%, and also the DA has dropped as well from 38.5% to 29.1%.
All right, and then the EFF. I'm trying to see basically static in Joburg, slightly ticking upwards, but not making any gains, any significant gains. So that would be the big story for Joburg. The two big parties losing, and Action SA coming in as the new number 3. All right, let's look at some of the other ones. Tshwane, which was also coalition last time, and again there's no clear winner at all, and I think it's the same picture, but you can confirm about the two big parties losing ground, and let's see where the EFF is there.
Yeah, with Tshwane, you can also see that the percentage of VDs that has been declared so far is just over 20%, 21.1%. And again, Action SA, they are doing well in Tshwane as well, with 7.8%, and the ANC losing some grounds in Tshwane from 2016. We are projecting that they would end up with 33.3%. and also very similar to the DA, 33.2%. The EFF is, like you said, also for Tshwane, it's more or less constant, gaining by 0.1%. And yeah, the Freedom Front Plus, they have also gained from 2% in 2016 to 6.9% that we are projecting in Tshwane.
And that's also a little significant gain for the FF Plus in Tshwane specifically. All right, Nelson Mandela Bay. If we have Nelson Mandela Bay, the one that has been very closely watched in the Eastern Cape, where there have been a lot of ructions, and yeah, let's see how coalition agreements are hobbled together in Nelson Mandela Bay, because you're projecting even more of a slide for the ANC. Just run us through this.
Yes, so even in Nelson Mandela Bay, we are looking at both the ANC and DA losing some ground, and ACDP has picked up. So we are projecting them to go to 1.1, if I can see that correctly. And also EFF has picked up a little bit from 5% to 6.4%.
All right, and the DA, I mean, in the Western Cape was very confident it would sort of consolidate its own stronghold. So let's bring up the Western Cape if we have that, and see how the DA performed. And obviously this is where the Good Party wanted to play, where a lot of the newcomers wanted to play. Let's see if we can bring up the Western Cape. I think last we had 53% for the DA, so the governing party again getting a clear majority, but maybe not doing as well as it had hoped. All right, here we have, we start with the ANC. Let's just confirm your prediction for the DA was in fact 53%.
Yes, so the DA, as you can see, from 2016, they have lost significant grounds to what we are projecting them to end up with as 53.2%. And this is 65% of the voting districts have been already declared, so the results would be quite accurate at this stage, I think.
All right, and possibly disappointing for the DA in the Western Cape. All right, what we're giving you here, thank you very much, Emil, and thank you very much, Professor, is an overview of the projections based on your earlier projections. You're confident that they are sticking, but of course we have more of the vote in, more than 50% of the actual vote in, and not looking good for the ANC, below 50%. The DA losing a lot of ground. We'll see who is blamed for that. In some areas gaining, but overall the picture not great for the two big parties. Some gains for the EFF, the Action SA, third in Johannesburg, so that'll be an interesting trend to look at. And then the FF Plus also gaining ground. Sophie, on the floor of the Results Operations Center, who are you chatting to?
Yes, I can see you are having fun with numbers there. Yeah, indeed, the biggest liberation organization on the continent, oldest, let me emphasize, but also the oldest political party in the world, the African National Congress, really dealing with challenges. With me, I have the Treasurer General of the ANC, Ntate Paul Mashatile, to talk to us about where did they go wrong. Ntate, where did you go wrong?
The challenge, I would say, let me just say that we're not happy that we did not win outrightly. Let's start there. But we are happy that we are leading most of the municipalities. Of course, we came through the challenges of an economy that is not doing well after we came out of COVID. But also remember, Sophie, this was a 48 days campaign. with very little resources. So the challenges in many other areas were water, electricity. If you take Joburg, for instance, Soweto, it was a complete blackout by Eskom. 5 days before the election, they were instituting stage 4 load shedding. In some of the areas in KZN, Mugeni, people have been complaining about water there. So it's a wake-up call for us to...
It's your own councillors, it's your own deployees who have failed. These are your own deployees. You talk about energy, it's your own ministers who are in charge. You talk about water, your own ministers, from national to the province, even at local level. Therefore, it's your own deployees, and the writing was on the wall since 2016. What did you do to try and sort of stop the trend?
Well, you know, if you take a company like Eskom, you can't turn it around in 3 years. It's going to take time, but we have started now. You recall that we wanted to separate generation from transmission and distribution. That work has now started. Obviously, we could not have completed it on time. In Joburg, for instance, the mayor has indicated that they want to take over as city power. So you can see that the plans to correct the weaknesses of the past have now started. As the president said, we want to do better this time. We're going to work harder and harder, faster and faster. We've heard the people.
You spoke about lack of resources in terms of election material and the election machinery. But that can't be a reason. You have members of parliament who are receiving some compensation. You have provincial executive committees and MPLs. You have councillors. You even have deployees in the SOEs. What have you done to make them aware that the death of the ANC, they are also going to experience problems, and therefore they must rescue the organization? You don't have to rely on handouts, because after 1994 it was clear that international community said, now you are in government, you are on your own, particularly the Scandinavian countries that kept pumping money to liberation organization. What did you do?
You'll recall earlier this year, Sophie, we asked all our members to contribute to introduce what we call crowdfunding. It was really to ask members to contribute. I must say that they are doing it, but elections are very expensive. I think many people sometimes don't understand that it's so expensive to run elections. Contribution by party members, MPs, ministers will not take you anywhere nearer. So we really had the challenge, but of course we relied on our volunteers. In fact, many provinces and regions raised their own funds. We supplied them with some posters and T-shirts, but we put our people, our volunteers, and say, go door to door. And I think it has worked.
The other issue here, you know, as a veteran politician, that for you to continue to do well as a political party, you have to defend your base and the gains, particularly your loyal constituency at all costs. But it looks like you were so divided going to this election that you even forgot to defend your base. Going forward, how are you going to rebuild? I want to look at a province like KZN. 1994, you didn't have KZN, but the strategy and tactics that you applied, you were able to get KZN. You were able to get the coalition in the Western Cape. Why this time around you didn't apply the same strategies to ensure that, because only when you are united you can be a formidable force? Was it about the ANC or personal gains?
In fact, to the contrary, we actually made sure that comrades work together. If you look at KZN, everybody campaigned together. President Zuma also put his weight on the campaign. We're still analyzing what could have gone wrong, particularly in the north of KwaZulu-Natal. That's where we see the trend of the IFP coming up strongly. We are going to analyze that. But I don't think it was because of the division of comrades. I think in this election throughout the country, our comrades worked together, all the places. So we emphasize unity. We said to comrades, even where there were problems with ward councillors, we said to them, put that aside. Let's all go and campaign. It's about the ANC. The rest we will look at after the elections and try and fix our house. But for now, let's go to the people. And I think our people, especially the volunteers, the activists, the leaders, they went out in full force.
When you look at the history of the liberation organizations on the continent, when you lose it, you're gone. It's downward spiral. What guarantees do you have in terms of whether you'll regain the lost ground? Because look, South Africans now understand that you can vote a different way. It doesn't mean that I have to be loyal to the liberation organization. It will be very difficult to make those gains in 2024. What will be your strategy going to 2024?
We also don't want them to be loyal to us. They must be loyal to our work, our actions, what we do, particularly service delivery. But we have started with a program of renewal. We are renewing ourselves. We are saying this coming 5 years, we're going to be better. We're going to do better. We're going to prioritize the people. We're going to take action where there's corruption. I think that's what people want to see. Action by their organization. Confidence will come back.
When he's addressing his final rally in East Rand, the leader of the EFF says, let's put our differences aside. Let's have a pact. EFF, DA, ANC. Of course, you have different policies and views and principles. But what do you read from that statement? Can political parties in South Africa really put their differences aside and just think about ordinary people who don't have electricity, who don't have water, there are no roads? I mean, really in the countryside, do you think we can reach that stage that politics, it's not about stomachs, but it's about delivering?
Well, my sense is that we have reached an era where there won't be winner take all. So the politics of coalition are very important. That's why the ANC has not closed the door to anybody. I hear the other parties are saying, well, we don't want the ANC, we don't want EFF. Our door is open because we believe that we have reached an era where we can't work alone.
Are you leading the negotiations on coalition?
Well, I have not been given this task at this time.
Are you meeting at night? Those night meetings?
We're going to meet tomorrow as a top six. If they ask me to lead the discussion on coalitions, I'll do it.
Thank you so much, Ntate Mashatile. That was the ANC Treasurer General, Ntate Paul Mashatile, talking about the ANC and its performance and perhaps where they have to improve, and also in terms of the previous challenges, how that impacted on their performance. And Tsepiso Ditapokitseu.